Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are embarking on a really fascinating and honestly somewhat intense journey.
Intense is definitely the right word for it.
It really is. We are going to explore the hidden mechanics of human connection. We're looking at interpersonal power dynamics, self-preservation, and, those invisible forces that dictate why we are drawn to certain people and why we push others away.
Right.
Now, to be completely transparent with you, the source material we are pulling from today is, well, it's dark.
Very dark.
Yeah, it's this intriguing text that delves into what many would call dark psychology. It looks at the more manipulative, calculating aspects of how human beings can influence, control, or sometimes even exploit one another.
I mean, it covers everything from making someone obsess over you to neutralizing perceived threats to your ego.
Exactly. But here is the critical pivot, and I want to be crystal clear about our mission today. We are not here to read a manual on manipulation.
No, absolutely not.
We are taking those exact same source concepts and completely transforming them. Our goal is to reverse engineer these darker tactics. We want this deep dive to serve as a neutral, highly educational masterclass for you.
Which is such an important framing.
We're going to look at the underlying cognitive biases, figure out how to set absolutely bulletproof boundaries, and learn how to navigate complex relationships with a profound level of emotional intelligence.
That framing is essential.
Yeah.
And I think it is vital to establish right up front why this actually matters to you, the listener.
Yeah, let's get into the why.
Understanding these psychological levers, the very mechanisms that can make a person feel attached or anxious or defensive, it is not about weaponizing them to use against others.
Right.
It is about recognizing when these levers are being pulled on you. The reality of human behavior is that it often operates on incredibly predictable paradoxes.
We really do.
We walk around thinking we are making conscious, rational choices in our relationships, our careers, our daily interactions. But very often we are simply running on deeply ingrained psychological software.
And when you understand how that software is coded, you are no longer at the mercy of it.
Precisely. You can see the manipulation coming from a mile away. More importantly, you can consciously choose to build healthier, more resilient, and far more authentic connections. We are essentially giving you the source code so you can patch the vulnerabilities in your own system.
I really like that analogy, patching the vulnerabilities. It makes it feel less like we're learning dark arts and more like we're just, I don't know, installing a really good mental firewall.
Exactly, a mental firewall.
So, looking at the first set of concepts in our material, the original author spends a staggering amount of time talking about how to make someone attached to you.
They do.
They use words like inducing jealousy, keeping someone off balance, basically creating a dependency. But when I was reading through this, it struck me that beneath the toxic delivery, what they are really talking about is just basic economics.
It is. It's the economics of attention.
Right. It's how our brains perceive the value of scarcity versus predictability. How does supply and demand actually map onto human emotion?
It maps on almost perfectly. And to understand the mechanics of it, we have to look at how human beings are biologically wired at a fundamental level. Our brains are designed to habituate to constants.
Habituate meaning we just get used to them.
Right. It is a vital evolutionary survival mechanism. Think about walking into a room with a loudly humming refrigerator. Initially, it's annoying.
Super annoying.
But within 20 minutes, you stop hearing the hum entirely. Your brain recognizes that the sound is constant, it poses no immediate threat, and therefore it actively filters the noise out.
Just deletes it from your awareness?
Why? To save cognitive bandwidth for new, potentially important stimuli, like the sound of a twig snapping, which could be a predator, or a sudden change in temperature.
So we just tune out what we're used to because it's safe.
Precisely. Now, apply that biological wiring to human attention and affection. If the attention you give someone is guaranteed, if it is infinite, perfectly predictable, and overwhelmingly available at all hours of the day,
They tune it out?
the human brain of the person receiving it will inevitably begin to devalue it. It isn't necessarily malicious, it's just biology. They will habituate to you. Your presence, your texts, your availability, it all becomes the hum of the refrigerator.
Wow.
The brain filters it out because it doesn't have to work to secure it. Conversely, attention that is paced, somewhat unpredictable, and maintains an element of autonomy retains an incredibly high psychological value. The brain is forced to stay engaged to understand the pattern.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because this is where relationship advice usually goes totally off the rails.
Sure.
Isn't that just playing games? It sounds like the classic toxic play hard to get strategy where you wait exactly 3 days to text someone back just to manufacture anxiety.
That is the manipulative interpretation of the principle, yes.
Mm,
The dark psychology approach says artificially restrict your attention to cause pain and anxiety, thereby making the other person desperate.
right, which we are rejecting.
Completely. The healthy, emotionally intelligent interpretation is very different. It's not about pretending you are busy. It's about actually being engaged in a life of your own.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
When your attention is scarce because you are deeply invested in your own passions, your career, your friendships, and your personal growth, that scarcity is authentic. You aren't playing a game. You simply have a high opportunity cost for your time.
Because your time is actually valuable to you.
Yes. And human beings are incredibly adept at subconsciously sniffing out the difference between someone who is playing a manipulative game and someone who genuinely values their own life.
I love that. It reminds me of how we see this exact same psychology play out in the world of high-end retail. Think about the economics of a true luxury brand like Rolex or the famous Hermes Birkin bag.
The ultimate status symbols.
Exactly. These brands do not chase customers. You will never, ever see a Rolex buy one, get one free end of summer blowout sale.
Yeah.
They tightly control their supply. In fact, they make it incredibly difficult to give them your money. You have to get on a wait list. You have to build a purchase history. You essentially have to qualify to be a customer.
That it works flawlessly.
By doing that, they create an absolute frenzy of desire. The scarcity makes the product feel infinitely more valuable.
And that leads perfectly into a fascinating sociological concept known as mimetic theory. This was pioneered by the philosopher and anthropologist René Girard.
Mimetic theory.
Girard argued that human desire is rarely autonomous. We like to think we independently decide we want something based on its objective qualities, but Girard said no, our desires are mimetic, meaning they mimic the desires of others.
Mimic, hence mimetic.
We want what we believe other people want or what we believe other people value.
So if everyone is clamoring for the Birkin bag, I suddenly want the Birkin bag, even if I didn't care about purses yesterday.
Exactly. It's the ultimate social proof. Now bring that back to interpersonal dynamics. If you are a person who clearly possesses a rich, independent, fulfilling life,
Yeah.
you have strong boundaries, you aren't waiting by the phone.
You aren't relying on someone else to validate your entire existence.
Right. You inherently communicate high value. You signal to the world that your time and attention are scarce resources that you protect. Because you demonstrate that you highly value your own life, others inherently mimic that valuation. They desire to be a part of it. You become the Rolex in that scenario.
And contrast that with the alternative. Think of a fast fashion brand that is constantly blasting you with emails about their claimant sales. Everything must go. 80% off. Please buy this.
Desperation is palpable.
The supply is infinite, and the access is immediate. You might buy a t-shirt because it's convenient, but you do not revere it. You don't pass it down to your grandchildren.
You discard it.
When you apply that to human connection, it is a stark, almost uncomfortable realization. Being constantly overwhelmingly available doesn't make you more loved. It often just makes you clearance rack fashion.
It's an uncomfortable truth, but a necessary one to internalize. And this principle extends far beyond romantic or social dynamics. Consider professional environments, like salary negotiations or job interviews.
Oh, absolutely. I was just thinking about this. Let's say we walk into a job interview radiating absolute desperation. We signal, whether verbally or through our body language, that we will take any salary, we'll work weekends, we have zero other options.
That your entire sense of self-worth is riding on getting this specific job.
The hiring manager, whether they are a compassionate person or not, will consciously or subconsciously devalue you.
They have to. The company will offer you the absolute minimum because your behavior indicates that your supply is completely elastic and your demand for their approval is absolute.
But if you walk into that exact same negotiation with quiet confidence, clearly communicating that you know your market worth, that you are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you, and that you have other opportunities.
You shift the entire power dynamic.
Even if the other opportunity is just our internal willingness to walk away and keep looking.
That is the key. The willingness to walk away is the ultimate demonstration of perceived value. It proves that you are not dependent on this single external source to survive. The person who is truly, genuinely willing to walk away from a bad deal always holds the leverage.
But walking away, or even just giving someone the space to walk away, is terrifying for a lot of people. When we feel like we are losing our grip on a relationship or a situation, the immediate human instinct is usually to tighten our grip, to assert more control.
Which brings up something really difficult.
The source material talks quite a bit about not caging a partner, but it frames it as a tactic to keep them guessing. I want to elevate that. What is actually happening in the brain when we try to cage someone or when someone tries to cage us?
To understand that, we need to dive into a foundational psychological principle called reactance theory. It was introduced by Jack Brem in the 1960s, and it explains the profound and often frustrating paradox of human control.
Reactance theory.
Reactance theory states that whenever a human being feels that their freedom, their autonomy, or their ability to make a choice is being threatened or restricted, they will experience a powerful, immediate defensive reflex to reclaim that freedom.
And it doesn't even have to be a massive restriction of freedom, right? It can be incredibly subtle.
It can be entirely subtle, and the reaction is often entirely disproportionate to the threat. When people experience reactance, they will frequently rebel by doing the exact opposite of what they are told or pressured to do,
Just out of spite.
even if rebelling is actively against their own best interest.
Yes. This is one of those concepts that instantly explains so much bizarre human behavior. It's the classic wet paint sign analogy.
The perfect example.
You can be walking down a path in a park, totally lost in your own thoughts, listening to a podcast, not caring at all about the wooden benches around you. You wouldn't have given them a second glance.
Right?
But the second you see a bright yellow sign that says, wet paint, do not touch, what happens? Suddenly, every fiber of your being wants to touch that bench. You get this overwhelming, almost irrational itch in your brain. You want to look around, see if anyone is watching, and just tap it with your finger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do you suddenly care about the bench? Because the sign restricted your freedom to touch it. Your brain isn't evaluating the logic of getting paint on your hands. It is rebelling against the restriction of your sovereignty. The ego is terrified of being controlled.
So translate that wet paint sign into how we behave in relationships. I'm thinking of a composite of several friends I've known over the years. They get anxious that a partner is pulling away, so they become the human equivalent of a do not touch sign.
They clamp down.
They demand constant text check-ins. They monitor who their partner is talking to. They guilt trip them for spending a night out with friends instead of staying in. They try to mandate affection.
And their brain thinks, if I enforce these rules, I will secure the relationship. But the partner's brain does not process those demands as an act of love or connection or even a cry for help.
How does it process it?
The partner's brain processes it as a cage. And the moment someone feels caged, their primary psychological objective is no longer to evaluate the quality of the relationship. Their primary objective is to break the cage and prove to themselves that they are free.
Even if they still love the person, the need for autonomy overrides the affection.
Precisely. We see this heavily in public health campaigns, actually. There are famous studies of anti-smoking campaigns targeted at teenagers.
Oh, this is fascinating.
When the ads were highly authoritative, saying things like, you must not smoke, it is strictly forbidden, teenage smoking rates in those demographics actually increased. Yes. The teenagers felt their autonomy was being threatened by an authority figure, so they smoked to reclaim their sense of independence. The campaigns that worked were the ones that presented the facts neutrally and said, it's your choice.
That is wild. Telling them not to smoke made them smoke. So when we apply this to our own lives, I always think of the analogy of holding sand.
The sand analogy is brilliant.
Imagine you are standing on a beach and you scoop up a handful of dry sand. If you hold your hand out in front of you with your palm completely open, flat, and relaxed, the sand just rests there. It conforms to your hand. It stays exactly where it is.
Right.
But the moment you get anxious, maybe the wind picks up and you worry the sand might blow away, you try to trap it. You squeeze your fist as tightly as you can. What happens?
The pressure creates friction, and the sand rapidly slips through the cracks of your fingers. The harder you squeeze, the faster you lose it. The paradox of control is that the very act of trying to enforce possession over someone or something usually guarantees its departure.
Applying this is the hardest part. It requires a pretty brutal audit of our own lives. We have to ask ourselves, where are we gripping the sand too tightly?
Exactly.
In our romantic partnerships, are we giving our partners the genuine freedom to choose us every day, or are we demanding they stay? In our friendships, do we get resentful when a friend hangs out with another group? If you are a parent, are you suffocating your teenager with so many rules that their only avenue for identity formation is total rebellion?
It takes an immense amount of internal security to leave your palm open. You have to accept the very real risk that if your palm is open, the wind might actually blow the sand away. But it is the only way genuine, uncoerced connection thrives.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second because this brings up a really difficult scenario. Let's say we do leave our palm open. We give them total freedom, and then they actually leave. They pull away, or they initiate a breakup, or a friend ghosts us. The instinct is to panic. The source material gives a lot of very manipulative advice on what to do when someone pulls away, how to punish them, how to make them jealous, how to run a smear campaign to regain the upper hand.
A very toxic approach.
If we are completely discarding that approach, what is the psychologically sound alternative? How do we handle that massive loss of control without losing our minds?
That is the ultimate test of emotional regulation, and the alternative is a concept drawn from dialectical behavior therapy and broader psychological frameworks. We call it radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance.
And to visualize how it works in interpersonal dynamics, I like to think of it as emotional Aikido.
Emotional Aikido. I love martial arts analogies, so let's unpack this. What is the dynamic when someone initiates a rejection?
When someone initiates a breakup, or even just suddenly and coldly withdraws their affection, they are creating an intense, asymmetrical power dynamic. The person doing the rejecting is subconsciously bracing for impact. They expect a specific script to play out. They expect you to resist.
Right. They expect us to beg, to get angry, to demand closure, to send that giant wall of text at 2 a.m. explaining why they are making a mistake.
Exactly. And here is the harsh, counterintuitive truth about that resistance. All of your begging, all of your anger, actively validates their ego.
It does.
It confirms their higher status in the dynamic. It tells their brain, wow, I must be incredibly valuable and powerful if this person is falling apart over losing me. Your resistance is the friction they need to feel secure in their decision.
So if I'm crying and begging them to stay, I'm actually giving them the exact psychological reward they anticipated.
You are. Radical acceptance is a practice of completely short-circuiting that expected psychological reward. Radical acceptance means that when someone communicates a boundary to you, whether they say they want to leave, they need space, or they don't want to work with you anymore, you instantly, calmly, and completely agree with their decision.
Wait, hold on. Just agree. Without asking for reasons. Won't they just think I never cared about them in the first place? Doesn't that look cold?
It feels cold in the moment, but it is actually profound respect for their autonomy and, more importantly, for your own dignity. You do not ask for a post-mortem of the relationship. You do not demand a list of reasons. You simply accept the reality of the present moment without resistance.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
You might say, I understand, I respect your decision, and I wish you the best, and then you stop talking. By doing this, you instantly remove the friction that their ego is relying on to feel powerful.
And this is where the Aikido analogy comes in. In a traditional street fight, if someone throws a punch at you, the instinct is to block it by putting your arm up to meet their force with your own force. That's resistance. You both take damage. But an Aikido master does something entirely different. When the attacker throws a punch, the Aikido master doesn't block. They simply step slightly to the side and guide the attacker's momentum past them. The attacker put all their weight into a punch, expecting to hit a solid object. When the object isn't there, they stumble forward and fall under their own weight.
That is exactly what happens psychologically. By calmly agreeing with a withdrawal, you are stepping aside. You are using the other person's momentum to regain your own balance, leaving them totally disoriented because they have nothing to push against. They expected a fight, and instead, they hit thin air.
I've seen this play out in business, too. Let's look at a high-stakes corporate negotiation. Imagine a buyer and a vendor negotiating a massive, multi-million-dollar contract. The vendor decides to play hardball to see what they can get away with.
A classic power play.
They threaten to walk away from the deal entirely unless the buyer agrees to a 20% price increase. The vendor is posturing. They expect the buyer to panic, to plead about deadlines, and to offer a frantic counterproposal.
And what happens if the buyer deploys radical acceptance?
The buyer, the emotional Aikido master in this scenario, simply closes their folder, calmly stands up, opens the door, and sincerely thanks the vendor for their time. They state neutrally that the new price doesn't work for their budget, so they respect the vendor's decision to walk away.
The perfect counter.
The sudden, absolute loss of leverage is shocking. The vendor's ego is completely deflated. The expected script was torn up, and more often than not, the sudden realization that they have zero control brings the vendor right back to the table, usually dropping the price increase entirely.
Because the vendor's grandiosity required an audience that was willing to play the game. Which leads us into a very challenging territory. We've talked about what to do when someone pulls away, but what about the people who refuse to pull away but insist on making your life miserable?
Oh, this is the worst.
The source material offers a sort of field guide on dealing with highly arrogant, self-centered, or toxic people, often using the pop psychology label of narcissists. The book suggests playing elaborate mind games to tear these people down and assert dominance.
Which we are not doing.
We need to discard the offensive games and focus entirely on a clinical, neutral exploration of boundary enforcement. How do we neutralize a grandiose ego without getting dragged into their toxic orbit?
This is so critical because we all encounter these people. We can't always just walk away from them. It might be a coworker who constantly throws you under the bus in meetings to make themselves look good, a family member who turns every single holiday gathering into a dramatic tragedy centered around their feelings, or a neighbor who is just perpetually looking for a fight.
Right.
To deal with them without losing our own sanity, we have to understand what they're actually harvesting from us.
Harvesting is the right word. A grandiose ego is essentially a roaring fire, but it cannot sustain itself. It requires a constant, steady source of external fuel to stay alive. In clinical terms, we sometimes call this narcissistic supply.
Narcissistic supply.
The fuel is emotional reactivity. And here is the key. They do not care if the emotional currency you give them is positive or negative.
That is the part that trips people up. We think they only want praise.
They prefer praise, admiration, and subservience, yes. But if they cannot get positive attention, they are perfectly happy to consume your anger, your frustration, your tears, or your exhausted defensive arguments.
Wow.
To the grandiose ego, negative attention still serves the primary psychological purpose. It proves to them that they are significant enough and powerful enough to control your internal emotional state. If they can make you yell, they have won.
Okay, so if we know they are feeding on our reactions, how do we starve the fire? If I'm dealing with that coworker who just CC'd the entire department on an email blaming me for a mistake they made, my absolute biological instinct is to hit reply all, attach screenshots, and defend my reputation with furious anger.
Which is exactly what they want, because now you are engaged in a public mud wrestling match where they get to play the victim or the superior authority. To neutralize them, you must systematically deny them their emotional currency. You have to deploy the gray rock method.
The gray rock method, I've heard this term in therapy circles. It basically means making yourself as emotionally uninteresting, unresponsive, and boring as a plain gray rock sitting in the dirt.
Precisely. You do not ignore them entirely, which might provoke an escalation, but you drain all of the emotion, color, and defensiveness out of your responses. Direct, emotionless, strictly factual communication is the absolute antidote to their ego games.
Neither rock.
When you refuse to react emotionally, you become a psychological void to them. They cannot extract any value from you. In your email example, a gray rock response wouldn't be a furious defense, it would be a two-sentence reply. The data in this report was finalized on Tuesday. I have attached the original file for reference.
Cold hard facts.
No exclamation points, no demands for an apology, just a gray rock.
A great way to visualize the mechanics of this is dealing with an attention-seeking toddler. If a toddler throws a massive screaming tantrum in the middle of a grocery store because they want a candy bar, and the parent reacts by yelling back, getting visibly flustered, arguing with the toddler about why they can't have it, or eventually giving in and buying it just to stop the noise. Exactly. The toddler wins. The toddler learns a vital lesson. Throwing a chaotic fit successfully manipulates the parent's emotions and alters their behavior.
And what does the gray rock parent do?
The gray rock parent doesn't yell. They don't negotiate. They simply state the boundary, we are not buying candy today. And then they completely disengage emotionally from the tantrum. They let the kids scream while they calmly look at the nutritional information on a box of cereal.
Just totally unfazed.
It is agonizing in the moment, but the child eventually realizes the tantrum is yielding absolutely zero return on investment, and they stop.
That requires ironclad internal boundaries. I also think of it in a professional, almost theatrical context. Imagine being the director of a major motion picture. You are on set, costing the studio hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, and you are dealing with a notoriously difficult diva lead actor.
A total nightmare scenario.
The actor halts production to throw a massive fit about the lighting in their trailer. or how another actor is looking at them. They want a screaming match in front of the crew to center the drama around their importance.
If the director yells back, it's a headline in the tabloids tomorrow.
Exactly. A veteran, masterful director will not argue about who is more important or defend their lighting choices. The director will simply look at the actor, point to the mark taped on the floor, and say, in a completely flat, polite, unyielding voice, "Stand here, read the line."
Stand here, read the line. Just total unyielding structure.
There is no emotion, no insult, no engagement with the chaotic narrative the actor is trying to spin. Just absolute, polite rigidity.
Yeah.
That kind of immovable boundary entirely deflates the grandiose ego because it offers absolutely nothing to push against. They realize they cannot direct the scene.
But let's be real about the aftermath of doing that. It is incredibly draining to act like a gray rock. You hold all that tension in, you deal with the diva coworker, or you calmly step aside from the breakup using radical acceptance, and you look like you have it all together in the moment.
But then you go home.
But then you go home. It's 2 a.m., the house is quiet, and suddenly your brain turns on. You start replaying the conversation. You start analyzing what they meant by that one subtle comment. You start scripting out what you should have said.
The 2 a.m. overthinking loop. It is a universal human plague. The source material talks about this, how to escape continuous, obsessive thinking about someone who has wronged you. But again, we need to elevate this beyond getting revenge and look at the practical cognitive behavioral frameworks for breaking the loop.
Yes, please.
To do that, we have to understand why the brain gets stuck in the first place. We have to look at the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect? This is named after a psychologist in the 1920s, right? Bluma Zeigarnik.
Yes. Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a bustling cafe in Vienna, and she noticed something fascinating about the waiters. These waiters could remember incredibly complex orders. Who wanted the schnitzel? Who wanted the coffee with 2 sugars? Who asked for extra napkins? Perfectly, without writing anything down.
Impressive memory.
But the moment the bill was paid and the transaction was complete, she noticed that the waiters completely forgot the order. If you asked them 5 minutes later what the table had eaten, their minds were blank.
Because the transaction was closed, so the brain dumped the data.
Exactly. Zeigarnik discovered that the human brain is biologically wired to obsess over incomplete tasks, unresolved problems, or unclosed loops. The brain holds onto them with incredible tenacity. When you are lying awake overthinking an ambiguous text message from your boss, or analyzing a weird interaction with a friend, your brain is basically that waiter in Vienna, constantly staring at an unpaid bill.
We tend to punish ourselves for overthinking. We think it's a character flaw or a sign of weakness or that we're just neurotic. But there's a strange psychological twist to this, isn't there? Overthinking is actually your brain trying to do its exact job. It is trying to protect the body.
It is a defense mechanism. Your brain perceives an unresolved issue, a sudden coldness from a partner, a vague critique at work, as a potential threat to your safety or social standing. Because the brain hates uncertainty, it runs endless simulations.
Just constantly looping.
It replays the past to find the mistake, and it projects into the future to calculate every possible worst-case scenario, all in an attempt to ensure you aren't surprised and eaten by the metaphorical tiger.
The problem is, in the modern world, most of our threats are abstract and unresolvable. You can't fight a weird text message with a spear. The simulation just runs endlessly in the background. Smartphones and social media have made this exponentially worse because there are 1,000 open loops hitting us every single day.
An endless stream of unpaid bills.
So what is the cure? Because just telling someone, hey, stop thinking about it, let it go, is probably the most useless advice in the history of psychology.
To stop thinking about it is essentially telling the brain to ignore a perceived threat, which it will absolutely refuse to do. The cure for the Zeigarnik effect isn't to suppress the thought. The cure is to forcefully create an artificial ending.
An artificial ending.
You have to close the loop for your brain. You must provide the closure your brain is frantically seeking, even if the external situation remains messy.
How do we actually do that? How do we manufacture closure when the other person isn't giving it to us?
Think of the human mind like a rigid corporate board meeting. If you have an agenda item, let's say, a vague worry about whether a friend is mad at you, and you allow that item unlimited time on the floor, the board members will argue about it for the entire week, ruining the company's productivity.
Right.
You have to act as the strict CEO of your own mind. You do this through a cognitive behavioral technique called time boxing.
Time boxing. So we literally schedule our worrying.
You look at the worry, and you give it a strict, immovable time limit. You say, I am going to give this exact issue exactly 15 minutes of my undivided, intense focus right now. I will sit down with a piece of paper. I will write down the absolute worst-case scenarios. I will write down what evidence I actually have, and I will make a hard decision on my next action step.
Very structured.
And the crucial part is, at the end of those 15 minutes, you declare the meeting adjourned. The topic is tabled permanently. When the brain tries to bring it up again at 2 a.m., you tell it, we already held the meeting. The decision was made. We are not revisiting the agenda.
It reminds me so much of how the tech industry handles building products. In software engineering, there is a concept called decision fatigue. If a team of developers tries to write a totally flawless piece of software before launching it, they will be stuck in a loop of overthinking and tweaking code forever.
Because perfection is impossible.
Exactly. The product will never launch because there's always one more bug to fix. So the industry intentionally adopts a good enough protocol. They push the code live when it solves the primary problem, fully accepting that there might be minor bugs they can patch later, rather than obsessing over an impossible, flawless iteration.
The good enough protocol is a brilliant way to manage cognitive load.
When you are stuck in an overthinking loop at 2 a.m., you have to adopt the good enough protocol for your own thoughts. You have to tell your brain, the information we have right now is good enough. We have analyzed the text message enough. I am pushing the decision live, the decision being that I'm going to sleep, and we will deal with any bugs in the morning.
It takes practice, but enforcing that boundary internally is just as important as enforcing boundaries with toxic people externally. Which brings us to our final theme. And this is perhaps the most crucial framework for long-term emotional survival because it addresses how we synthesize everything we've talked about.
The ultimate defense.
The original text closes with some very cynical warnings about being too kind. It suggests that kindness, openness, and vulnerability inherently make you a target to be exploited.
Right. It basically argues that to survive, you have to become a sociopath who trusts no one.
Which is a miserable way to live. However, while the premise is overwhelmingly cynical, there is a kernel of truth about vulnerability in there that we need to unpack. We are going to translate this into the concept of strategic vulnerability and the construction of what we call the fortress of the self.
The fortress of the self. I'm really glad we're talking about this because I think our culture has gotten profoundly confused about vulnerability recently.
Also,
We see a lot of messaging, especially in self-help and corporate leadership seminars, that tells us to be completely open all the time, to share our deepest traumas, our darkest insecurities, and our greatest fears with everyone, as if unconditional transparency is the ultimate, universally good sign of authenticity. But unconditional transparency isn't bravery. It's often incredibly dangerous.
it is dangerous because it ignores the reality of human nature. Sharing your deepest emotional blueprints with unvetted individuals does not automatically build intimacy. Often, it simply provides someone who hasn't earned your trust with a highly detailed psychological map of your exact triggers.
You're just handing over the blueprints to the bank vault.
If you hand your vulnerabilities to someone who lacks empathy or someone who operates with a grandiose ego, you are just handing them the weapons they will eventually use against you.
So, if we shouldn't be unconditionally transparent, but we also don't want to be cold, cynical robots, what is the middle ground? What does the fortress of the self actually look like?
Having a fortress of the self means maintaining an independent baseline of happiness. It means you have a core identity, a set of values, and a sense of self-worth that exists wholly outside of any current relationship, job, or interaction. That independent baseline is your ultimate armor. Strategic vulnerability means you are entirely comfortable with who you are. You know your flaws, you know your trauma, but you are highly discerning, highly protective about who gets access to that inner world.
I always like to use a medieval analogy for this. Think of your inner self, your core vulnerability, as a beautiful, wealthy castle. It's surrounded by a deep moat, and it has a heavy wooden drawbridge. Having strong boundaries, having a fortress of the self, does not mean you sit alone in the dark keep, isolated and terrified of the world forever, shooting arrows at anyone who walks by.
That would be the dark psychology approach, total isolation and hostility.
Exactly. The healthy approach simply means the drawbridge stays up by default. You do not leave the gates wide open for anyone off the street to wander in and set up camp. You stand on the walls, you look at the people standing on the other side of the moat, and you observe their behavior over time.
You vet them.
You only turn the crank and lower that drawbridge when someone has proven, through consistent, trustworthy, reciprocal behavior, that they are an ally bringing trade and friendship, not a conquering army looking to pillage your emotional resources. The key is recognizing that you get to control the crank. You don't owe anyone access to your castle just because they knocked.
That is a perfect visualization. And returning to a strategic context, look at the world of professional poker. A poker player doesn't sit down at a table with strangers and immediately turn their cards face up to prove how authentic and honest they are.
That would be ridiculous.
Revealing your cards, your true desires, your fears, your weaknesses before the betting is done, before you have assessed the character of the other players at the table, doesn't make you an honest player. It makes you the mark. It guarantees you will be systematically exploited by players who are holding their cards close to their chest.
It's just bad strategy.
It is. Strategic vulnerability is recognizing that your deep emotional truths are highly valuable currency. They are the most precious things you own, and they should only be spent in environments that have proven to be safe, reciprocal, and mutually respectful.
This raises such an interesting point about how modern society operates, especially online. We have this pervasive social media culture that heavily romanticizes oversharing. People post videos of themselves crying, they broadcast the intimate details of their relationship breakdowns, they list their deepest insecurities for hundreds of thousands of strangers to consume in the algorithm.
It's everywhere.
We falsely equate this boundaryless behavior with being real or relatable. But true authenticity doesn't require an audience of strangers giving you validation in the comment section.
It actually dilutes the authenticity. When you broadcast your vulnerability to the masses, it often becomes a performance of vulnerability rather than the real thing. It's a way of seeking external supply, much like the grandiose ego seeks supply, just in a different flavor.
We really need to advocate for a return to quiet, self-possessed strength. The strength of knowing exactly who you are, what you feel, and choosing to share that only with the 2 or 3 people in your real life who have actually earned the right to hear it.
That quiet strength is the ultimate goal of everything we've discussed today. It is the culmination of understanding the economics of attention, managing the paradox of reactance, practicing radical acceptance, starving the grandiose ego, and asserting cognitive control over your own mind.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive. Let's summarize the journey we've been on. We started with source material that focused on specific, often cynical maneuvers designed to manipulate others, but we've transformed that to reveal the underlying truth.
The real power dynamics.
Whether we are talking about not smothering someone so they have the freedom to choose you, deploying radical acceptance when faced with rejection so you aren't feeding their ego, using the gray rock method to calmly deflect toxicity, or time-boxing our own overthinking, it all points to one undeniable conclusion.
Absolute ownership.
Yes. It is all about taking absolute, uncompromising ownership of your own emotional reactions, your own boundaries, and your own intrinsic value. It means that the ultimate power in any relationship and the ultimate defense against any form of manipulation is simply self-respect. When you respect your own time, your own mind, and your own fortress, nobody can use your psychology against you.
That is beautifully summarized. And as we close, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over in the days ahead.
Let's hear it.
We've talked a lot about protecting our vulnerabilities from others, about keeping the drawbridge up. But consider this. If our deepest psychological vulnerabilities, our fears of abandonment, our desperate need for validation, our hidden insecurities, are the exact spots where we are most easily manipulated by others, what happens when we stop trying to hide those vulnerabilities from ourselves?
Oh, wow.
What happens when we actively work to heal them? Could it be that the person who truly knows themselves completely, who has shown a bright light into their own darkest corners and accepted what they found, becomes entirely immune to the psychological games of others? Because once you have nothing left to hide from yourself, nobody can ever use your truth against you.
Wow. That is an incredibly powerful thought to end on, sealing the vulnerability as the ultimate armor. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you walk away feeling empowered, clear-headed, and ready to warmly but firmly apply these new lenses to the world and the relationships around you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep your drawbridges well-oiled.